Even if that should happen, the appeals panel ruled it would be, quote, insufficient grounds to consider the detention center a major federal project subject to the environmental review. So let me get this straight. If the federal government funds Alligator Alcatraz, which thus far it hasn't, we'll get back to that, it's still not a federal project?
Hey, it's Jordan with Status Coup on the ground. I am in Flint, Michigan, East Palestine, Ohio, Tumwa, Iowa. Please support the leading independent news outlet on the ground covering what the corporate media covers up.
Hey, it's Jordan with Status Coup. Horrible news as President Trump's ICE Gestapo torture camp, known as Alligator Alcatraz, will now remain open right as the worst of Florida's hurricane season is about to hit. After a federal appeals court overruled a lower court's shutdown of Alligator Alcatraz. And in this federal appeals court ruling, it basically affirms that Trump and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis have been lying about who's going to pay for this monstrosity. Let me read you some of the details about this ruling, which honestly makes no sense, but most courts these days controlled by conservatives don't make much sense. Appeals court says Alligator Alcatraz can remain open. An immigration detention center in Florida's Everglades can remain open, and the government can resume sending detainees there after a federal appeals court ruled on Thursday against a lower court's decision, effectively shutting down the facility. A 3-judge panel of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit in Atlanta granted the state and federal government's petition to pause the ruling by a federal judge in Miami last month. Under that ruling, no additional detainees could be sent to the center known as Alligator Alcatraz, and much of it had to be dismantled within 60 days. Just for an update before I continue, based on my sources, there's only about 100 prisoners left. So hundreds of millions of dollars of Florida taxpayers, if you're watching from Florida, you're paying for this torture camp. There's only 100 prisoners left. Now, presumably, they're going to chip in more prisoners with no due process, most of them who have no criminal charges. But can you think of a bigger boondoggle? Hundreds of millions of dollars in no-bid contracts to donors of Trump, DeSantis, and the Republican Party, and there's only 100 prisoners there currently. Let me continue. The latest ruling was a victory for Florida officials who pushed the boundaries of traditional immigration enforcement when they opened the facility in July. The ruling was also significant for the Department of Homeland Security, which is argued in court that it was not running the Everglades Detention Center. Stay with me because that's important. In granting the stay, the appeals panel found that the lower court had misinterpreted a federal law requiring a review of potential environmental harms before building a major project in the ecologically fragile Everglades. It found that because the detention center had so far been entirely funded by Florida, and because the state operated the center, the National Environmental Policy Act would not apply. Florida has spent hundreds of millions of dollars on the detention center, an outlay that DeSantis, a Republican, has repeatedly said will be reimbursed by the federal government. Even if that should happen, the appeals panel ruled it would be, quote, insufficient grounds to consider the detention center a major federal project subject to the environmental review. So let me get this straight. If the federal government funds Alligator Alcatraz, which thus far it hasn't, we'll get back to that, it's still not a federal project that would then be under the law and regulations that environmental reviews have to be done, like an environmental impact study, which, by the way, wasn't done for federal projects like the Dakota Access Pipeline that stampeded through native land in North Dakota, and environmental impact studies have been blown off for a lot of other federal projects because the law these days don't matter. And frankly, to be fair, it was being blown off before Trump too. How that doesn't square. So the federal government's going to pay for it, but it's actually not a federal project. It's a state project. So a state doesn't have to do any environmental review. Any lawyers watching? Leave me what you think in the comments. But I want to get back to that because basically in that ruling, the court is affirming that Trump and DeSantis have lied to the American people, specifically Florida taxpayers. And if you're watching in Florida, because it's kind of gone MAGA in recent years, are you cool just being conned and your money being stolen from you? Because you're going to pay for this monstrosity. Let me remind you, this was DeSantis soon after this opened, what he had to say when asked, how's this reimbursement going to work? Because he was vowing that it's the federal government that's going to pay for this, not Florida.
How it would be on anything. So federal government reimburses us for stuff all the time. So, for example, when we had Hurricane Milton, the Biden was president then, he signed 100% reimbursement for debris and for emergency protective measures. And so all the debris stuff would be done by local governments, and then they would submit, and then they would get reimbursed 100%. And the state could get reimbursed if we're putting in it as well. So it's no different than how it's been. That will be something that will be done. And I think that's probably the most efficient way to do it. Now, I think they do have more money now in the agency, so we'll see what they're doing.
Well, the torture camp has now been open for over 2 months, seems like 2 years. Not only has Florida not been reimbursed from FEMA a dime, actually, as far as I know, and there's been no reporting, I don't even know if Florida has submitted for reimbursement. So they're just planning on leaving this torture camp open indefinitely as tropical storm and hurricanes are about to hit. I'll get to that in a minute. By the way, it's an outdoor makeshift tent city with no plumbing, no running water, no protective anything against like a severe storm, a tropical storm, much less a hurricane. Okay. But it sure seems, based on the judge's ruling, they're saying, well, since Florida's paying for it, federal law doesn't apply to it, and somehow even if the feds pay for it, federal law still won't apply to it. But regardless, they're confirming that Florida's paying for this. So if you're in Florida, which have some of the highest increasing rents in America, Miami, Tampa, West Palm, you're up there in terms of high rents, high house prices. Property tax is out of control in Florida. You're going to be paying at some point hundreds of millions of dollars for this literally torture camp, all to fight the illegals. How does that sound? And by the way, this came out recently when it was shut down. I think the number is actually outdated at this point, but this is how much money Florida taxpayers are losing on this torture camp. Florida may lose $218 million on empty Alligator Alcatraz as judge orders shutdown. Florida could be on the hook for $218 million. The state spent to convert a remote training airport in the Everglades into an immigration detention center. The center may soon be completely empty. Again, this was when the lower court ruled to shut it down. Shutting down the facility for the time being would cost the state $15 to $20 million immediately, and it would cost another $15 million to $20 million to reinstall structures if Florida is allowed to reopen it, according to the court filings by the state. And you know what? I actually think that's fine to DeSantis, because this is all a boondoggle. There's no purpose for this. This is really to shower contractors who then donate to DeSantis, the Florida Attorney General, other Florida Republican legislators. This is just to give them free money for a totally unnecessary prison camp. By the way, of unqualified companies that have no experience running a prison or dealing with health emergencies, as we've broken in covering this. There have been prisoners who have fainted, were unconscious for a half hour, and guards didn't even know how to check a pulse and didn't try. But they're getting hundreds of millions of dollars, some of these contractors who have previously and will now lavishly donate in legal bribery to DeSantis and other Republicans. I mean, to be clear, Democrats do this in other states too, as I've covered and was revealed in my book, We the Poisoned, Exposing the Flint Water Crisis Cover-Up, published last year. Check it out if you haven't. I mean, the Flint water crisis was a major privatization scam where all to build an unnecessary new water pipeline with using the people of Flint as guinea pigs, they handed out no bid contracts to contractors who then showered local Democratic politicians with money. And as a result, Flint ended up being poisoned. All the details, which I think is the biggest financial fraud and the biggest government cover-up of the 21st century, because an unknowable number of people have died. It's all in my book due to the Flint water crisis, which is ongoing. But this is the same thing. It's absolutely outrageous. And let's move away from the financial boondoggle and get to the I don't know, life or death stakes. If you live in Florida, it's been a kind of low-key hurricane season. No massive hurricanes damage yet, but I mean, it's, as we record September 5th, hurricane season goes mid to late September. There has been seasons where people were saying to themselves, oh, it's been relatively calm. And then boom, a massive storm comes. Let me show you what's going on now, because there is a tropical storm brewing. Here we go. Tropical storm Gabrielle forming. Some forecast track swings west towards South Florida. That's where this is. The Alligator Alcatraz. Ominous forecast tracks for soon-to-be-named Atlantic storm Gabrielle continue to swing westward towards South Florida. Thursday at 2 p.m., the National Hurricane Center indicated that the probability of formation has climbed to a 60% chance of development in the next 2 days and a 90% chance in the next 7 days. 90% chance in the next 7 days. And overall, Florida is surrounded by potential tropic storms in September forecast. According to the National Hurricane Center, the peak of the Atlantic hurricane season is September 10th, a couple days now, with most activity occurring between mid-August and mid-October. What to know in its latest global tropics hazard outlook, covering September 10th to the 16th and September 17th to the 23rd, the Climate Prediction Center indicated at least 20% chance of cyclone formation, at least of tropical depression strength in the Florida Gulf, the Gulf and the Caribbean region. Why would that be a problem? Maybe you missed my interview a couple weeks ago, but here is my interview with Rebecca Jones. She's a climate scientist. She responded to hurricanes and other disasters in Louisiana and Florida. She was pushed out of the DeSantis administration after blowing the whistle on him manipulating COVID death data. But she basically explained that Alligator Alcatraz will be essentially blown to pieces with people dying, even by like a minor storm. Let me show you.
There is no world in which makeshift tents or even temporary trailer setups would be able to withstand even a tropical storm. So there's wind ratings for every housing structure that's built in South Florida, and South Florida is at the highest risk, which means that any habitat that's built is supposed to be able to withstand, 110 mile per hour winds. I spent the morning scouring the state's contract sites to see who they bought these trailers from to check the wind rating. But of course, for some reason, none of this information is available in the state's contract sites. And I'm sure if you put in a public records request, you get an answer in 3 years. But even trailers in South Florida are extremely dangerous places to be, even ones that are wind graded, if you have anything over 30 miles per hour. And, it's not even a tropical storm until it's much stronger than that. So a severe thunderstorm in this area is potentially deadly, much less anything bigger than that. It's a death trap.
You think people are going to die?
Yes, absolutely. People are going to die. And there's no guarantee that anybody will tell us.
Could be why, as you said, the Trump administration, other than trying to sell the merch, is kind of moving back on this, seeing the writing on the wall.
DeSantis he plans. He saw, the desire for Trump to reopen Alcatraz, which blew up immediately because everyone's like, do you have any idea how much money it would cost to actually open? There's a reason why we shut it down in the first place. And DeSantis is always plotting. And his relationship with Trump is very icy. So he thought something, he'd throw him a bone and call it that. I guarantee that was part of the initial thought process of that. But I don't think Trump would care if people were dying. He would just say they were rapists and murderers and criminals, even though we know that less than 8% of the more than 100,000 people who have been taken by ICE actually have violent criminal convictions on their record. 8%. And so that's not going to be true either. But I mean, this is a very cynical way of looking at it, but a swamp is the perfect place to dispose of bodies.
It's a death trap. And a swamp is the perfect place to dispose of bodies. I hope none of that happens. But at the end of the day, now that this torture camp is allowed to remain open, they are going to start shuttling in more prisoners. There will be more torture there, as we've reported over and over. People being handcuffed outside in scorching heat, left there for hours with no water. Prisoners being beaten and bloodied by guards who seem to get off on the torture of prisoners. Prisoners being denied medicine. It literally is a torture camp. Make America great.